Welcome, Cara Lopez Lee.
Thank you. Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much, MJ. What a kind introduction. I'm going to set this down because I'm going to come out in the audience. This might seem weird, but I'm just going to come out in the audience later and sit. So there that is. All right. Thank you all so much for braving coming and sitting in a live theater with your masks on. I really appreciate seeing your faces, but I also want to welcome all the people who are at home watching. So there are other people with you. Yeah. All right. So, Usually I love to frame and display family photos where I can see them every day. It feels like the expression of a deep urge for connection and belonging. But there's this one family photo that my grandma gave me that I keep hidden in a file cabinet. It's an old black and white of this stern-faced Chinese man with a little bow tie and a big blocky head, much like grandma's and mine, because he's her father, Ma Bing Sum, the long-ago owner of a Chinese restaurant in El Paso, Texas. Now, my grandma was a child of both Chinese and Mexican immigrants, and I was always begging her for family stories. So I'm pretty sure she gave me the photo of my great-grandpa, so I would always know who to blame. You see, Ma Bing Sum, back in the early 1900s, took a Mexican bride less than half his age. And then he went on to have sex with his wife's younger sister when he was 36 and that girl was only 14. And his wife's sister, that girl, was Grace Lopez, the girl who gave birth to the family secret, my grandma. So Ma Bing Sum told his wife's in-laws not to tell anyone he was the father. Because look, if his reputation were ruined, who would support the family? And so they kept quiet. And to this day, I have one aunt who still refuses to speak to me because I dared to call what her father did rape. And look, I get it. I mean, to her, he was just a sweet old guy who protected her and taught her how to cook. He was also a pillar of El Paso's old Chinatown who helped his fellow immigrants get their papers and find jobs, even paid their doctor bills. But to the Lopez side of my family, he was just the man who ruined my great-grandma. They said that Grace changed from this happy, chirpy, delightful young thing into a withdrawn, silent shell of a girl until she died of tuberculosis at 17. Now, my only picture of Grace, my great-grandma, is out in the open on a shelf in my office where I can see it every day. And she's wearing this little cloche hat from the 1920s, you know, those little bell-shaped hats covered in flowers. But her eyes look really haunted. And I often look into those eyes and I wonder if Grace really just died of a broken heart. And I've long wrestled with the idea that I carry within me the genetic inheritance of both my great-grandma and my great-grandpa, of both the victim and the perpetrator. This is how a single act of abuse can reverberate through generations. I'll tell you what I mean. Like, my grandma, Grace's daughter, was raised as an orphan among her mother's brothers and sisters. And her aunts treated her like Cinderella, made her cook and clean and take care of all their kids until she gave birth to her son, my dad, who out of wedlock. And so at that point, one of the aunts suggested at this point maybe she should ask her father for help. So she said, "What? My father?" She'd always been told her father was dead. She had no idea. She was stunned. So she wrote him an angry letter. "Why did you abandon me all these years?" And his response was to give her a job waiting tables at his Chinese restaurant, which she took. And my dad recalls these huge family gatherings around Christmas time where all of his cousins would be showered with gifts from their aunts and uncles while he opened painstakingly a single gift from his mother. They were outsiders. And so my grandma grew into this bitter woman who never really learned how to show affection to her only son, who grew into my often emotionally distant father. And my mother, who happens to be white, she left the picture when I was about 2 years old. And so that's how I also ended up being raised by my grandma, the angry, bitter outsider. And it was one of the few things that she actually was able to commiserate with me about. She said, Cara, when you lose your mother, you lose everything. And sometimes that felt true. I mean, whenever I hugged her, I remember her arms never really rested comfortably anywhere, as if even her arms never knew where they belonged. Once I ran home crying because a bully beat me up, and my grandma said, you know, I won't always be here to protect you. You're going to have to learn to work things out yourself. I felt like I was always running home and never quite getting there. So, in 2008, at the age of 45, I decided to start researching a novel to explore my burning question. How do you find home when you feel like you don't belong? And I go in search of my great-grandfather's past. And one of my most exciting clues comes from one of his sons, my favorite uncle, who tells me his father was born in Gonghao, China. So off I go to Gonghao, only to discover it's not a single village, but a district of 11 villages. I've got no idea which one was his. But okay, the locals take me to this 99-year-old man from one of the several Ma family villages. And just to see if he might, be able to tell me something. Okay, quick sketch of Gitngon village. Rice paddy, rice paddy, rice paddy. A couple of dozen gray brick cottages, and a few of these crumbling old ruins of these Western-style mansions, which were built decades ago by overseas Chinese to show off their American wealth. So my translator and I get whisked into one of the cottages and out into a courtyard where there are these tons of these like maybe a dozen or more of these chattering women, and then the old village patriarch, Mr. Ma, who rises from his wheelchair to greet us, even though this clearly costs him great effort. He is so slight that I can make out the contours of his skull, but he has these bird-bright eyes and intense energy for a man of 99. So the women hustle me into a chair across from him and thrust tea and dumplings at me in an act of hospitality that's so aggressive, it's like, make yourself at home or else. Mr. Ma is really excited to meet an American with ties to the Ma people, but communication is tough because he speaks a local dialect. So I have to ask the questions in English. My translator asks them of his granddaughter in Cantonese. She asks her grandpa in Toisanese, and then everything comes back the other way. Takes like 10 minutes just to explain, my great-grandpa was Ma Bing Sum. He was born in 1887, but he left Gonghao before you were born, so I don't expect you to know much, sir. Just hoping for a little local history. But Mr. Ma refuses to give up until he's found a connection between us. So I show him my old picture of my great-grandpa and this old letter written to him in Chinese by one of his sons, my favorite uncle. And he looks at these and he says, ho, 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 Ma Bing Sum. And a flurry of Chinese flies over my head. And my translator says, your great-grandpa is from this village. So Mr. Ma pulls out a red book filled with the names of Gitngon's male lineage going back centuries, and he turns to a page featuring the names of Ma Bing Sum and his eldest 3 sons. What's more, Mr. Ma did meet my great-grandpa when he came back for a visit in the 1930s. One of those old crumbling mansions was built by my family. The clincher comes when Mr. Ma says, Ma Bing Sum had a Mexican wife from Paso? My eyes fill with tears. But why? For this stranger I never knew, who my grandma always hated. I can only tell you something tugs at my belly button. The past. Mr. Ma invites me to sign the village book. I say, but I'm a woman. He says, it would be our honor. You are family. And it's true, this sweet old guy and these women stuffing me with dumplings are my cousins. I feel like mobbing some is there with us, finally claiming my family as his, no longer to be disregarded as the bastard branch of the family tree. And with my signature, I accept him too, declaring in writing, I belong. And that's how I become the only woman in Geek On's book of male ancestors. Back in America, I share this story with my grandma, and in return, she gives me a rare gift. She smiles. And in that moment, I come home. My grandma has since passed away, but if you come to my house, her portrait is one of the first things you would see. Carolina Lopez in the 1940s. This glamorous 20-something knockout with this long rolled and pinned hair, these dark piercing eyes, and this reluctant little smile that she'll now be wearing for the rest of my life. And in honor of this woman who became my surrogate mom and who did show her love to me by sharing with me her secrets, I honor that gift by still keeping her father's picture hidden in a drawer. Thank you.